Mẹ em khóc mắt lệ nhòa. Bố anh thì đi lại còn mẹ anh gọi điện thoại đến từng nhà. Nhiều ngày rồi mình không về, không liên lạc được gì cả, chỉ còn vẹn lại mảnh giấy. Đừng lo đêm nay con đi chơi xa. Em ơi đi trốn với anh, mình đi đến nơi có biển bạc núi xanh. Chạy con xe anh chở em trong chành, mình phóng tầm mắt ngắm chân trời mới toanh. Mình ngủ một giấc mà không cần báo thức, giờ nào mà khi anh đang trong ca trực. Em thì đang lo ngày mai giảng đường, ôi những thứ chán chường không tẹo nào háo hức. Mình rời thành phố chật chội náo nức, nơi mà cả việc thở cũng làm ta lao lực. Mới chỉ con đường xa làm anh thấy rào rực, muốn đưa em đi trốn đến tận cùng trái đất. Anh chẳng cần biết là ngày nắng đẹp rạng ngời, hay gió về hay bão táp mưa rơi. Ngày mình đi với nhau ấy là ngày đẹp trời, thì theo anh đi trốn em ơi.
Lòng em mơ mơ cùng anh đi đến tận cùng chân mây, vượt núi cao hay biển sâu. Biết mấy là yêu cho vừa, rất mấy thời gian cho vừa. Khi yêu ta mơ về nhau, để thấy lắm lúc lòng mình nhẹ nhiều khi muốn đem hết tất cả để mà đi. Một lần mình sống như những đứa nhóc không nhà, sống cứ sẽ ở một nơi xa.
Theo anh đi trốn em ơi. Từ lên voi xuống chó, danh vọng hoặc bãi bàn, chỉ muốn êm ả với nhau qua ngày tháng. Hè xuống còn nước mắt, lửa hồng khi đông sang. Nhưng ta càng lớn càng không có sức phòng thủ, đời cuốn sau ta cả khi ta trốn trong phòng ngủ. Âu lo theo về dù ta đã khóa 3 lần cửa. Trốn đi không để giết ta lần nữa. Em ơi đi trốn với nhau, kể vòng xe đó nếu mình đi tới đâu. Kể cho nắng cháy cho bụi phủ vai gầy, kể cơm kể áo kể no đủ mai này. Sau lưng là bụi trước mặt đường chân trời, mình kể những luật lệ mà mình thường vâng lời. Đời nói mình vô trách nhiệm có vẻ không oan, thì một lần mình là trẻ không ngoan. Anh chưa từng lên kế hoạch cho cuộc đời anh sẽ là mây đang kéo đến hay trời ngời xanh. Nhưng nếu em muốn thấy chân trời mới toanh thì em ơi đi trốn với anh. Nhiều hơn một không khí, bớt đi những mệt nhoài, cuộc đời đó được mấy, bình yên như sớm mai. Em ơi đi trốn với anh, mình đi đến nơi có biển bạc núi xanh. Chạy con xe anh chở em chồng chành, mình phóng tầm mắt ngắm chân trời mới toanh. Và sẽ là những bình minh không có tiếng chuông báo thức, và tất cả điều đó làm anh thấy hào hứng.
Cùng chân mây vượt núi cao hay biển sâu. Biết mấy là yêu cho vừa, rất mấy thời gian cho vừa. Khi yêu ta mơ về nhau, để thấy lắm lúc lòng mình nhẹ nhiều khi muốn đem hết tất cả để mà đi. Sống như những đứa nhóc không nhà, sống biết dậy ở một phía xa.
Theo anh đi trốn em ơi.
This is important right now because you hear this taught a lot. It's taught across colleges, it's taught on campus, and it's taught in the media, it's taught in the entertainment industry. Today, whenever we're talking about the unspeakable acts committed in the name of Islam across the world in record numbers, what is it that we're inevitably told?
But the Crusades.
All right, don't ever use that voice again. But the Crusades. As a matter of fact, it's so commonly used. Here's a montage.
Remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ.
Why are only Muslims mentioned in talks about religious extremism? Did y'all forget about the KKK, Westboro Baptist Church, Crusades? We all have the bad seeds in the family.
The Muslims didn't go up from Jerusalem and march up to Europe to attack Christendom. No, the Christians marched down to Jerusalem to attack the Muslims.
The Crusades and the Inquisition. He went to the big ones, the ones where it's like everybody agrees. Woo, that was f***ed up, wasn't it?
And a lot of you probably believe that too, so it is time to get your paper plates, knife, and fork ready because we're about to have a sacred cow cook-off. It's a nice little graphic there. Sure to get us some letters. So let's get through these myths. If you've been taught about the Crusades, I'll call them the Second Crusades, the retaliatory Crusades. I'll explain in a minute because it's important. That they were unprovoked. That it was just Christians running across the globe with pointy hats and swords, killing any and all Muslims they could find, innocent or not, simply because they didn't like their brownness. It couldn't be further from the truth. Now, it's important because this is taught in schools across the country. A lot of people believe this. The fact is that these crusades, the Second Crusades, they were a response to the First Crusades from Islam, from the Muslim onslaught for hundreds of years. For over 400 years, there was consistent Muslim expansion, aggression, violence. Muslims took Jerusalem in 638 AD. They pillaged Rome in 846 AD. Christian Spain and Portugal in 711 AD. Sounds like a gas station, but it's historical context that you need to know. That's why you tune in. Southern Italy during the 9th century. The Ottoman Turks were advancing into Europe and invading the Byzantine Empire. I think it was 1050, 1060 something AD. The Turks were marching into Asia, Syria, and then the big one, the big reason. So if you look at this map and you can see it expanding, was 1453, the capture, the sacking of Constantinople, which basically put an end to the Christian Byzantine Empire. And here's the thing. I understand military expansion, okay? So I'm not going to condemn the Islamic world for doing this back then, okay? Now, right away, that should change the context to the Crusades because people war and people go back and gain territory and win. But the sheer brutality from Islam, for example, they deliberately desecrated the burial sites of Peter and Paul.
Dick move.
In 846. Exactly. These are military terms you need not concern yourself with. They would behead people, as we see today. They had methods of torture that were incredibly brutal. The dimitude, meaning they would force non-Muslims to be subservient and pay taxes, and they didn't get to enjoy the same kind of rights as Muslims got to enjoy. Something we don't mention amongst our white guilt, millions, some people estimate higher than 100 million died under the Arab slave trade. We have courses that we're forced to take here in the United States to learn about the evils of slavery that we stopped. Oh, are they teaching those? Anywhere across the Islamic world? Is there Islamic guilt? Is checking your Islamic privilege a thing? So this kind of brutality, this kind of inhumane treatment, and yes, military expansion and cultural expansion is what led to the retaliatory crusades. People like Vlad the Impaler, you've probably heard of. Do you know Vlad the Impaler?
Commonly known as Dracula, I believe.
Dracula is how he's known. Yeah, Vlad the Impaler was an actual person.
Some sucked.
Little bit of a sadist. I'll give that to you. Vlad the Impaler became really brutal precisely because he was a prisoner and saw the inhumane treatment, saw the brutality from the Islamic Empire. That's why he's seen as a folk hero to some. Now, I would say he went a little too far the other direction with impaling people and allegedly drinking blood.
He found the line.
But
it's good for him. He found it. You find it and then you dance back.
But they heard the message loud and clear.
It's true.
He was one of the few people who fought them off. He was using Verizon back then while everyone else was on Sprint. They got the message.
He was ahead of his
They
time.
were Vlad charges.
Like that.
I do. So all of this is what led to the Pope putting forward the idea of a Christian crusade for the first time that kind of gave license to killing people who weren't Christians because they were facing the extinction, potentially, what they thought of their culture, of their way of life, to who they saw to be barbarians at that point. They were thought of as an act of love in response to Muslim aggression. Historically, they met the criteria that was necessary. So that's a big myth that we know. Another one that we hear a lot, and that context matters, is that the Crusades are some sort of a source of modern Muslim aggression or angst toward the West. There are terms out there, often parroted by, of course, the Young Turks, Reza Aslan. you've probably, did any of you learn this in college where they talked about when Christians took Jerusalem in 1099? I should say took back Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Which is really what they wanted to do. They'll teach you when Christians took Jerusalem in 1099. No, when they took back Jerusalem. Kind of like when people talk about the War of 67 when Israel gained territory. They don't talk about how many countries, was it Egypt, Jordan, I'm going to remember the third one, were teaming up to eviscerate them, and Israel just happened to kick their asses and took their land for protection. It's left out. So when Christians took back in 1099, you've heard this term, right? That their siege of Jerusalem, blood. They had blood up to their knees. You might have heard it. It's a term thrown around a lot. Even so much so that Bill Clinton said this after 9/11, mind you. The context matters. In trying to be sympathetic and show his tolerance and how progressive he was to the terrorists and terrorist supporters across the Islamic world, Bill Clinton had this to say: those of us who come from various European lineages.
Can you do it in Bill Clinton? Yeah, try that.
Are not blameless. Indeed, in the First Crusade, when the Christian soldiers took Jerusalem, they first buried a synagogue with 300 Jews in it. I was going to say that's unnecessarily dark to do it in a Bill Clinton voice. And proceeded to kill Muslim women, Muslim children, at the Temple Mount. I want to get down to the part where he said, the description of the event describes soldiers walking on the Temple Mount, a holy place to Christians, with blood